Three girls walked into a shopping mall on a December morning in 1974. They never walked out. This is a true story. Imagine the last moment of your ordinary life, the final second before everything changes forever. For 17-year-old Rachel Trlica, 14-year-old Lisa Wilson, and 9-year-old Julie Moseley, that moment came somewhere between the fluorescent lights of Seminary South Shopping Center and a parking lot full of last-minute Christmas shoppers. One minute they were laughing, browsing through records, carrying wrapped gifts. The next, they had vanished so completely that 50 years later, we still don't know if they're alive or deceased, if they left willingly or were taken, if the truth died with them or lives on in someone's secret memory. What we do know is this: someone wrote a letter claiming to be Rachel. Someone knew details about their car that hadn't been made public yet. Someone, somewhere, knows what happened to three girls who simply ceased to exist on a winter afternoon in Texas. And someone has kept that secret for half a century. This is the story of the Fort Worth missing trio, a case so strange, so riddled with contradictions and unexplained evidence that it has haunted investigators, devastated families, and puzzled an entire city for 5 decades. Tonight, we open that file together. I'm Julian Cross, and this is The Midnight File. December 23rd, 1974, dawned cold and gray over Fort Worth, Texas. Christmas was 2 days away, and Seminary South Shopping Center buzzed with the familiar chaos of last-minute holiday preparations. Parents herded restless children past store windows, dressed in tinsel and artificial snow. Salvation Army bells rang at the entrance. Inside, the air smelled of popcorn, perfume samples, and that particular electricity that only exists in crowded public spaces during the holidays. It was an utterly ordinary day, the kind of day that blends into memory's background, indistinguishable from 1,000 others. Except for what happened next. Rachel Trlica woke that morning as a newlywed, married just 6 months to her high school sweetheart, Tommy. At 17, she stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, with long brown hair that caught the light, green eyes that her family remembers as full of life, and a chipped upper front tooth that made her smile distinctive. She was young, certainly, but she'd taken on adult responsibilities with the kind of determination that characterized her personality. She worked, she maintained a household, she drove her own car, a beige Oldsmobile that would become central to this mystery. On that December morning, she had plans to do what countless teenagers were doing across America: shop for Christmas presents with friends. Lisa Renee Wilson, Rachel's close friend, was 14 and absolutely radiant that day. She had a new boyfriend, Terry Moseley, and he'd given her a promise ring that very morning. She couldn't wait to show it off at a Christmas party scheduled for that afternoon. She dressed carefully that day, choosing a white pullover sweatshirt with the words "Sweet Honesty" printed in green letters across the front, bluish-purple hip-hugger pants that were fashionable at the time, and red and white Oxford shoes. She was at that particular age when everything feels momentous, when a promise ring means forever, when a Christmas party feels like the most important event in the world. She had no way of knowing she'd never make it to that party, that the ring on her finger would become a detail investigators would catalogue alongside everything else she wore that day. And then there was Julie Ann Moseley, just 9 years old, Terry's little sister, who made a last-minute decision that would alter the course of her life forever. Julie didn't want to spend the day alone while her older brother went out with his girlfriend. She asked if she could come along, and initially her mother Rayanne said no. But Julie persisted with that particular determination that 9-year-olds possess, and eventually Rayanne relented. She imposed one condition: Julie had to be home by 6 o'clock that evening. Julie agreed. She put on a red shirt, dark jeans, and red tennis shoes. She had several small scars, one under her left eye, another on her forehead, the kind of marks that come from childhood adventures, from climbing trees and riding bicycles and living the fearless life of a child who believes nothing truly bad can happen. She walked out the door that morning, excited to tag along with the older girls, to feel included and grown up. She had no idea she was walking toward something that would consume the next 50 years of speculation, investigation, and unanswered questions. Between 10:30 and 10:45 that morning, the three girls left their neighborhood. Rachel was driving. Their first stop wasn't the mall at all. It was an Army-Navy surplus store in Fort Worth, where Rachel picked up some items Lisa had on layaway. This detail matters because it establishes their route, their timeline, and most importantly, the fact that they were following a plan. They weren't acting erratically or spontaneously. They were doing exactly what they'd told their families they'd do: shopping for Christmas. From the surplus store, they drove to Seminary South Shopping Center, a sprawling retail complex that represented the height of 1970s suburban commerce. Rachel pulled her Oldsmobile into the upper-level parking lot near the Sears department store. She locked the car. The three girls walked toward the mall entrance, carrying the anticipation of an afternoon spent browsing stores, maybe grabbing a snack, enjoying the last days before Christmas. They stepped through those doors sometime around late morning or early afternoon, and then, for all practical purposes, they vanished from the face of the earth. Now, I want you to understand something about disappearances. Most missing persons cases resolve quickly, within hours or days. People turn up. They were at a friend's house. They got confused and went to the wrong location. They had a fight with their family and needed space. The vast majority of people who go missing, especially teenagers, come home. But sometimes, rarely, people disappear so completely that it's as if they've slipped through a crack in reality itself. The Fort Worth trio falls into this latter category, and what makes their case particularly haunting is that multiple witnesses saw them that afternoon, browsing stores, laughing together, behaving exactly as three girls on a shopping trip should behave. They were seen. They were there. And then they weren't. Store clerks later recalled observing the three girls in various locations throughout the mall. One remembered them in a record store, flipping through albums with the kind of patient enthusiasm that teenagers bring to music shopping. Another clerk noted they seemed happy, talkative, in good spirits. There was nothing unusual about their demeanor, nothing that suggested distress or fear or any indication that something was wrong. They were just three girls doing what millions of people were doing that December day, preparing for Christmas, enjoying each other's company, living ordinary lives. Except their lives were about to become anything but ordinary. 4 o'clock came and went. Then 6 o'clock. The deadline Julie's mother had set for her return. The girls didn't come home. In 1974, before cell phones, before the ability to check in with a quick text message, when someone was late, you waited. You assumed traffic, or that they'd lost track of time or stopped for food. But as the evening deepened and the winter darkness settled over Fort Worth, the families began to worry. Rachel's mother and her 11-year-old brother drove to Seminary South Shopping Center to look for the girls. What they found sent the first real jolt of fear through everyone involved. The beige Oldsmobile was still there, exactly where Rachel had parked it in the upper lot near Sears. It was locked. And inside, visible through the windows, were Christmas gifts, wrapped packages that suggested the girls had at least completed some of their shopping. Rachel's mother walked through that parking lot calling their names. She went inside the mall and convinced someone to make announcements over the public address system. Rachel Trlica, Lisa Wilson, Julie Moseley, please come to the customer service desk. Your families are looking for you. The tinny voice echoed through the corridors between stores, competing with Christmas music and the ambient noise of commerce. No one came. No one answered. The announcements hung in the air like unanswered questions, and then dissipated into silence. That night, as the mall closed and shoppers dispersed into the winter darkness, Rachel's father and Lisa's father did something that speaks to both their desperation and their hope. They stationed themselves by the Oldsmobile with a shotgun, standing guard through the cold December night, convinced that the girls would return, that there was some explanation. That any moment they'd see three familiar figures walking across the parking lot with shopping bags and embarrassed smiles, apologizing for losing track of time. But the girls never came. The fathers stood there in the December cold, watching their breath form clouds in the darkness, listening to the distant hum of traffic, waiting for daughters who would never arrive. As dawn broke on December 24th, Christmas Eve, the car remained exactly as it had been found, locked and silent, an artifact of interrupted plans. The police were notified. And here's where the case takes its first frustrating turn. Instead of treating this as the urgent missing persons case it clearly was, authorities initially categorized it as a runaway situation. Their theory went something like this. 3 teenage girls, well, 2 teenagers and a child, decided to leave the mall voluntarily, returned to their car at some point, grabbed what they wanted, and then took off for an adventure. Perhaps to meet boys. Perhaps to escape family pressure during the holidays. Perhaps just for the thrill of it. The police seemed to believe the girls would turn up in a day or two, sheepish and apologetic. The families were furious, and rightfully so. None of these girls had ever been reported as runaways. None of them had histories of rebellious behavior or running away from home. Rachel was a newlywed with responsibilities. Lisa had a Christmas party she was excited to attend. Julie was 9 years old, a child who still needed permission to go shopping with older girls, who had a strict curfew, who had absolutely no reason or ability to orchestrate some kind of elaborate escape plan. The idea that these 3 girls, ranging from elementary school age to married teenager, had collectively decided to abandon their families 2 days before Christmas struck everyone who knew them as not just unlikely but absurd. And yet, this was the initial official position. This was how the critical first hours of the investigation were framed, as if 3 girls had chosen to disappear rather than been made to disappear. If this case disturbs you as much as it disturbs me, if you find yourself drawn to these unsolved mysteries that refuse to release their grip on our collective consciousness, hit that subscribe button. Because the Midnight File opens a new case every week, and I promise you each one goes deeper than you expect. Then came the letter. On December 24th, 1974, Christmas Eve morning, Tommy Trlica, Rachel's husband of just 6 months, received something in the mail that would become one of the most analyzed, debated, and mysterious pieces of evidence in this entire case. It was a letter, handwritten, addressed formally to Thomas A. Trlica. Not Tommy, which is what Rachel actually called him, not Tom, but Thomas A. Trlica, the kind of formal address you might use if you didn't know someone well, if you were copying a name from a phone book or an official document. The letter was brief. It read, "I know I'm going to catch it, but we just had to get away. We're going to Houston. See you in about a week. The car is in Sears Upper Lot. Love, Rachel." On its surface, the letter seemed to support the police theory. Here, apparently, was proof that the girls had left voluntarily, a note from Rachel herself explaining their absence, promising to return in about a week. Case closed, right? Teenagers being teenagers. But nothing about this letter made sense. Nothing. Let's start with the postmark. The letter was mailed on the morning of December 24th, 1974. The girls' disappearance hadn't been reported in the press yet. The first news account wouldn't appear until the evening edition of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And yet, the letter writer knew that the car is in Sears' Upper Lot. This wasn't general knowledge. This wasn't information anyone could have guessed. This was a specific detail about where Rachel's Oldsmobile was parked. Information that, as of the morning of December 24th, should have been known only to the families, the police, and whoever had been at that parking lot on the 23rd. How did the letter writer know this? If Rachel had written the letter before disappearing, how would she have known the car would still be there, still in the upper lot, still near Sears? And why would she include such a specific detail when presumably she and the girls would have had no reason to believe their families would be searching for them so quickly? The handwriting raised even more questions. Experts described it as written in a childish script, the letters uneven and uncertain, as if formed by someone either very young or deliberately attempting to disguise their natural writing. Multiple handwriting analysts examined the letter and compared it to known samples of Rachel's writing. The results were inconclusive at best and highly suspicious at worst. The letter didn't match Rachel's normal handwriting. Her family insisted it looked nothing like her script. Most tellingly, the signature, Love Rachel, contained a peculiar anomaly. The initial L in Love appeared to have been originally written as a lowercase e, then overwritten to make it taller, to transform it into an L. It was the kind of mistake someone might make if they were trying to forge a signature from memory. If they'd started writing one letter and then realized their error mid-stroke, But wait, it gets stranger. Rachel was left-handed. She wrote with her left hand in that distinctive way left-handed people develop, often tilting the paper, angling their wrists differently than right-handed writers. Handwriting analysis of the letter suggested it had been written by someone right-handed. The slant, the pressure points, the way the letters connected, all of it indicated a right-handed writer attempting to produce text, not a left-handed person writing in their natural style. Years later, when DNA testing technology advanced sufficiently, the letter was examined for genetic material. Investigators hoped to find Rachel's DNA, to definitively prove she'd handled the letter, licked the envelope, touched the paper. What they found instead was unknown genetic material, DNA that didn't match Rachel's, DNA that has never been matched to anyone in any law enforcement database, DNA that belongs to someone who remains unidentified to this day. Someone touched that letter. Someone wrote it, folded it, sealed it, mailed it, and that someone wasn't Rachel Trlica. Think about what this means. On Christmas Eve morning, while 3 families were descending into panic, while police were treating the case as a runaway situation, while the entire city of Fort Worth was preparing for Christmas celebrations, someone sat down and wrote a letter designed to buy time, to create a narrative, to establish the story that these girls had left voluntarily, that they'd gone to Houston, that they'd return in about a week. Someone wanted the families, the police, and the public to believe this was all a teenage escapade, rather than something far darker, and that someone knew details about the car's location that they shouldn't have known, unless they'd been there, unless they'd seen it, unless they were intimately involved in whatever had happened to Rachel, Lisa, and Julie. The letter wasn't a reassurance. It was a red flag soaked in deception. And whoever wrote it is either responsible for the disappearances or knows exactly who is. Now the investigation shifted gears. The police could no longer dismiss this as simple runaways. Not with a potentially forged letter, not with 3 girls missing for more than 24 hours, not with Christmas Day approaching, and no sign of them anywhere. Detectives began interviewing witnesses, canvassing them all, trying to reconstruct the girls' movements on December 23rd. What they uncovered was a confusing web of sightings, accounts, and testimonies that contradicted each other in ways that only deepened the mystery. Multiple witnesses confirmed seeing the 3 girls inside Seminary South Shopping Center that afternoon. Store employees remembered them browsing, chatting, behaving normally. But then the accounts diverged. Some witnesses reported seeing girls matching their descriptions with various individuals. Security guards, people in vehicles, figures of authority who, in 1974, would have seemed trustworthy to 3 young girls far from home. And this is where the case becomes truly chilling, because if these witnesses are accurate, they suggest something calculated, something predatory, something that involved deception at its core. One of the most significant witness accounts didn't emerge until 2001, 27 years after the girls vanished. A man named Bill Hutchins came forward after a press conference about the case. Hutchins had worked as a night watchman in the Sears parking lot in December 1974. He reported that at approximately 11:30 p.m. on December 23rd, more than 8 hours after the girls should have met their curfews, he encountered a security guard in a pickup truck. In the front seat of that truck were 3 girls. Hutchins described them as appearing in good spirits, laughing and joking around with one another. He didn't realize at the time that these might have been the missing girls. But years later, when he saw age-progressed images and heard the details of the case, something clicked in his memory. Those girls in the truck that late at night, in the parking lot where Rachel's Oldsmobile sat locked and abandoned. Authorities eventually located the security guard Hutchins described. They interviewed him, and he denied ever seeing the girls, denied everything, said it never happened. So we're left with competing accounts, a witness who claims he saw something significant, and a potential person of interest who denies it entirely. But here's the part that should trouble you. Hutchins claims he reported this sighting to police immediately after the disappearance in December 1974. He says he called it in, gave his account, and assumed detectives would follow up. They never did. His report, if it existed, was apparently filed away or lost or deemed unimportant. For 26 years, This potentially crucial sighting went uninvestigated. 26 years. What might have been discovered if police had followed up in December 1974, while memories were fresh, while evidence might still have existed, while that security guard might have been caught off balance by immediate questioning. Another witness, an unidentified woman, reportedly told a store clerk that she'd witnessed 3 girls being forcibly loaded into a yellow pickup truck near a Buddy's grocery store at the mall. The truck allegedly had lights on top, the kind of lights that might be found on a security vehicle, a utility truck, or even an emergency vehicle. This witness was never located by police. Her identity remains unknown. The story exists only as a second-hand account, someone telling someone else what they saw and then disappearing before that account could be verified or investigated properly. Was she real? Did she actually witness something? Or was this a case of mistaken identity, of seeing something innocent and interpreting it as sinister after learning about the missing girls? We don't know. We can't know because she was never found. A fourth account mentions seeing the girls in a security patrol car making rounds near the Sears parking lot. Again, figures of authority. Again, vehicles that would seem legitimate, trustworthy, safe. If these accounts are accurate, and that's a significant if, they paint a disturbing picture. They suggest that someone with the appearance of authority, someone who could approach 3 girls without triggering alarm, someone who might have had a legitimate reason to be at the mall and in the parking areas, may have been involved in their disappearance. Security guards in 1974 were common at shopping centers. They drove around in marked vehicles. They wore uniforms. They represented safety. And if someone wanted to lure 3 girls away from a public place, posing as security, claiming there was a problem with their car, or that their parents had called, or that they needed to come with them for some official reason, would be devastatingly effective. Consider the psychology of it. Rachel, Lisa, and Julie were young, conditioned to respect authority, to trust people in uniforms. If a security guard approached them and said their car had been broken into, they'd follow him to check on it. If he said there was an emergency, that their parents were looking for them, they'd go with him. They wouldn't run. They wouldn't scream. They'd cooperate because that's what you do when someone in authority asks you to do something. And by the time they realized something was wrong, if they ever realized it, it would have been too late. But let me be clear. These are theories based on unverified witness accounts. We don't have confirmed evidence that the girls left with a security guard or anyone else. What we have are fragments of testimony, glimpses of possible truth obscured by decades and memory, and the fundamental unreliability of human observation. What we know for certain is this: 3 girls entered a mall and never came out. Their car remained locked in the parking lot with Christmas gifts inside. Someone wrote a letter claiming they'd gone to Houston, and 50 years later, we still don't know what actually happened to them. By now you're probably thinking what I'm thinking, that this case needed more than local police, that this required resources, expertise, investigative power beyond what Fort Worth could provide. And the families felt the same way, frustrated by what they perceived as inadequate police work, by the initial dismissal of the case as runaways, by the failure to follow up on witness accounts like Bill Hutchins's sighting. The families hired a private investigator named John Swaim in 1975. Swaim took on the case with determination, hoping that a fresh perspective and independent investigation might uncover what official channels had missed. What Swaim encountered was a flood of tips, leads, and anonymous reports, the kind of deluge that accompanies any high-profile missing persons case. In March 1976, someone anonymously contacted him with specific information pointing to a location near an oil well in Rising Star, Texas. The tipster claimed the girls might be found there. Swaim organized a search. They combed the area around that oil well, looking for any sign: disturbed earth, abandoned belongings, anything that might indicate the girls had been brought there. They found nothing. The lead evaporated like so many others. Another anonymous tip directed searchers to a bayou in Port Lavaca, Texas. Again, Swaim mobilized resources, gathered volunteers, searched the difficult terrain around that bayou. Again, nothing. Just water and vegetation, and the suffocating disappointment that comes from following a lead that goes nowhere. Over the years, Swaim and the families would chase dozens of similar tips. Some seemed promising. Others were clearly the work of attention seekers or confused individuals misremembering unrelated events. But every tip had to be followed because any one of them might be the real thing. Any one might lead to Rachel, Lisa, and Julie. In desperation, the families turned to psychics. Now I know what you're thinking. Psychics and criminal investigations occupy controversial territory. Law enforcement generally regards psychic tips with skepticism, and for good reason. Most psychic predictions are vague enough to be useless, and confirmation bias can make random guesses seem more accurate in retrospect than they actually were. But families of missing persons often reach a point where they'll try anything, pursue any possibility, grasp at any hope. And so the families consulted numerous psychics throughout the late 70s and 80s, hoping that somehow someone might provide information that could crack the case. One psychic in particular caught the family's attention. He went by Mr. Joseph, and he provided some details that seemed startlingly specific. Most notably, he mentioned Julie's red tennis shoes before this detail had been publicly disclosed. He knew she'd been wearing red shoes. How? Was it genuine psychic ability? Had he somehow accessed police reports? Was it just a lucky guess? Red being a common color for children's shoes? We don't know, but it got the family's attention. Mr. Joseph went on to predict that the girls had traveled north toward Oklahoma or Illinois, contradicting the letter's claim about Houston. He offered vague impressions, feelings, senses about where the girls might be. None of it led anywhere concrete. Interestingly, about 60% of the psychics consulted mentioned a blue hippie van in their visions or impressions. A blue van, they said. The girls were taken in a blue van, or they saw a blue van, or the blue van was important somehow. The consistency of this detail across multiple unconnected psychics intrigued investigators. Was there actually a blue hippie van involved? Or were the psychics all drawing from the same cultural imagery? The 1970s stereotype of the suspicious van, the kind of vehicle that would seem threatening in retrospect. Again, we don't know. No evidence of a blue van was ever found. No witnesses reported seeing the girls with a blue van. It remains one of those odd footnotes in the case, a detail that keeps recurring without any factual basis to support it. If you're the kind of person who needs to discuss cases like this, who can't just listen and move on without processing it with someone else, leave a comment below. Tell me your theory. Tell me what you think happened, because 50 years later, we're all still trying to make sense of this. And maybe someone reading this knows something they haven't connected yet. Maybe you remember something. Maybe your grandmother worked at that mall. Maybe your uncle was a security guard in Fort Worth in the 70s. Sometimes the smallest detail unlocks everything. As the years passed and the case remained cold, investigators began looking at known predators who might have been in the Fort Worth area in December 1974. Serial offenders. Individuals with histories of violence, particularly against young women. And several names emerged as potential suspects, though none have ever been definitively linked to the disappearances. James Mitchell DeBardeleben Jr. is perhaps the most chilling possibility. Known as the mall passer for his practice of passing counterfeit bills in shopping malls near interstate highways, DeBardeleben was operating in the Fort Worth area during 1974. The FBI believed he was in Fort Worth around the time the girls vanished, running his counterfeiting scheme. But DeBardeleben was far more than a counterfeiter. FBI profiler Roy Hazelwood, who studied him extensively, characterized DeBardeleben as the best documented extreme sadist since the Marquis de Sade, and called him one of America's most dangerous criminals. When DeBardeleben was finally arrested in 1983, investigators discovered a horrifying trove of evidence in his possession: photographs documenting assaults, detailed plans for abductions, audio recordings of unspeakable acts. The FBI linked him to multiple disappearances across several states, all following a similar pattern. Women and girls approached in public places, often shopping malls, and then taken, harmed in ways I won't detail here, and in many cases, never seen again. The geographic and temporal overlap is impossible to ignore. DeBardeleben was in Fort Worth. He targeted malls. He focused on young women and girls. He was active in December 1974. The FBI itself investigated whether he might have been responsible for the Fort Worth trio's disappearance. But despite all the circumstantial connections, despite the pattern that seems to fit, no definitive evidence has ever emerged linking de Bardeleben to Rachel, Lisa, and Julie. No photographs of them were found in his collection. No references to Fort Worth in his notes. Nothing concrete. De Bardeleben spent decades in federal prison, ultimately sentenced to 375 years for counterfeiting, abduction, and related offenses. He passed away in 2011, taking whatever secrets he possessed to his grave. If he was responsible for the Fort Worth trio, we'll never hear him confess. We'll never know for certain. Another name that surfaced in investigations was Edward Harold Bell. Bell was convicted of ending someone's life and suspected in numerous other cases throughout the 1970s in Texas. He operated primarily in the Houston and Galveston areas, and at various times he confessed to multiple offenses against girls during this period. His confessions were dramatic, detailed, and ultimately unreliable. He recanted them before his passing in 2019, and investigators could never verify most of his claims. Bell's known operational area was generally south of Fort Worth, making his involvement less probable geographically. But the letter claimed the girls went to Houston, Bell's territory. Was this a coincidence, a red herring, or was there actually a connection that investigators never fully established? Bell's case is frustrating because his confessions were too numerous and contradictory to trust, and his recantations make it impossible to know if he was taking credit for crimes he didn't commit or if he was responsible for more cases than anyone ever proved. Like de Bardeleben, Bell took his secrets with him when he left this world, leaving behind only questions and devastating ambiguity. Over the decades, suspicion has occasionally fallen on individuals closer to the victims themselves. This is standard investigative procedure. You look at family members, spouses, anyone who might have had motive or opportunity. Some researchers and even some family members have suggested that Rachel's husband Tommy or her sister Deborah warranted closer investigation. The reasoning goes something like this. The letter was addressed to Tommy in a formal way, as if the writer didn't know him well but knew his legal name. The letter's details suggested insider knowledge. Could someone close to Rachel have been involved in staging the disappearance? Could there have been tensions in the marriage, problems no one knew about, something that led to tragedy? But here's the reality. No credible evidence has ever emerged implicating Tommy or Deborah or any family member. Tommy was 19 years old, married to his high school sweetheart for 6 months, facing the horrifying reality that his wife had vanished 2 days before Christmas. Deborah was Rachel's sister, devastated by her disappearance. Both cooperated fully with investigations. Both submitted to questioning. Both lived the rest of their lives under the shadow of this unsolved case. Suspicion without evidence is just speculation, and speculation can be cruel to people who are already suffering unimaginable loss. The fact remains that 50 years later, no evidence points to family involvement. The suspicion exists primarily because when you can't solve a case, you start questioning everything and everyone, grasping for any possibility that might provide an answer. What makes the Fort Worth trio case particularly maddening is the complete absence of conventional evidence. There's no confirmed location where the crime occurred, if indeed a crime occurred at all, though at this point that seems almost certain. There are no remains that have ever been definitively linked to the girls, no personal belongings found discarded along a highway, no forensic evidence recovered from any location. They simply vanished, as if they stepped through a doorway into nothing and that doorway closed behind them forever. Throughout the decades, there have been searches, multiple searches. In a remarkable 2018-2019 effort, 3 abandoned cars were recovered from Benbrook Lake near Fort Worth. The operation was initiated by Rusty Arnold, Rachel's brother, who has devoted much of his adult life to seeking answers about his sister's fate. Rusty has never given up. While other family members passed away without learning what happened to the girls, Rachel's parents, Lisa's parents, Julie's mother, all leaving this world without resolution, Rusty has continued searching, pushing for new investigations, exploring every possible lead. The cars pulled from Benbrook Lake were examined thoroughly. Authorities never publicly disclosed whether any of them contained evidence relevant to the case, which might mean they found nothing, or might mean they found something they're not ready to discuss. In November 2024, additional vehicles were recovered from Fort Worth waterways in partnership with local police, part of broader cold case investigations using new sonar and diving technology. Every recovered vehicle represents hope, the possibility that finally, after all these years, physical evidence might emerge. And every vehicle that yields nothing represents another disappointment, another dead end in a case already filled with them. But the searches continue, because somewhere in the lakes, forests, and forgotten places around Fort Worth, there might still be answers waiting to be discovered. The DNA recovered from the letter, that unknown genetic material that doesn't match Rachel, has been run through every database available. CODIS, the combined DNA index system used by law enforcement, genealogical databases, familial DNA searches, nothing, no matches, which means either the person who wrote that letter has never been arrested for a crime requiring DNA collection, or they passed away before DNA databases became standard, or they're simply not in any system for reasons we can't determine. That DNA is perhaps the most tangible piece of evidence in this entire case, and it points to someone who remains unidentified 50 years later. As we approach the end of this file, I want you to consider the families. Consider Rusty Arnold, who was 11 years old when his sister disappeared, who spent his formative years watching his parents suffer, who grew into adulthood with this unresolved trauma as a constant presence in his life, and who still, in 2024, actively searches for answers. Consider Tommy Trlica, who was 19 when his wife of 6 months vanished, who received that disturbing letter on Christmas Eve, who has lived his entire adult life knowing that the last time he saw Rachel was just another ordinary morning, with no indication that she would never come home. Consider Lisa's family, who watched their daughter prepare excitedly for a Christmas party, who saw her showing off that promise ring, who have had to live with the knowledge that she never made it to that party, never got to be 14 turning 15, never experienced any of the life she should have had. And consider Julie's family, a 9-year-old child who begged to come along on a shopping trip, whose mother gave permission with the simple condition that she be home by 6 p.m., and who has now been missing for 50 years. Julie would be 59 years old today. 59, an entire lifetime lived by everyone else, while she remains frozen at age 9 in photographs and memories, and age-progressed images that show what she might look like if she's somehow still alive. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children maintains those age-progressed images, digital renderings showing Rachel, Lisa, and Julie as they might appear in their 60s. The images are haunting in their uncertainty. They show women with grey hair and aged faces, women who might walk past you on the street without recognition, women who might exist somewhere, somehow, if the most optimistic and unlikely scenarios are true. But the reality is almost certainly darker. The reality is that 3 girls went missing in 1974, and the statistical likelihood that they're alive after 50 years of complete silence is vanishingly small. And yet, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children reports that between 2021 and 2023, 117 children were recovered after being missing for a decade or more. 117 cases that seemed hopeless, that had gone cold, that everyone had given up on. And then new information emerged, or technology advanced, or someone finally came forward and those children, now adults, were found. It happens, not often, not as often as we'd like, but it happens. Which means that even after 50 years, even after everything that's failed to materialize in this case, there's still a mathematical possibility that Rachel, Lisa, or Julie could be found. That someone somewhere knows something. That the case isn't truly closed until we have definitive answers. As of December 2025, the Fort Worth Police Department continues to maintain this as an open investigation. If you have any information, if you remember something from December 1974, if your grandfather was a security guard at Seminary South, if you found something years ago and never connected it to this case, if you heard a rumor or a confession or a detail that didn't make sense at the time, you're encouraged to contact the Fort Worth Police Department at 817-335-4222 or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-THE-LOST. Even the smallest detail might be the piece that finally solves this 50-year puzzle. So what happened to Rachel, Lisa, and Julie? After researching this case extensively, after examining every available piece of evidence and testimony, after considering every theory and possibility, I find myself drawn to certain conclusions while acknowledging that absolute certainty may never be possible. The letter is key. Someone wrote it who wasn't Rachel. Someone with knowledge of where the car was parked. Someone trying to buy time, to create a false narrative, to make it seem like the girls left voluntarily. This suggests premeditation, or at minimum, quick thinking in the immediate aftermath of whatever occurred. The letter was mailed on December 24th, the morning after the disappearance. Someone had enough composure to write it, address it, and mail it while the families were still searching. That's cold. That's calculated. The witness accounts of security guards and authority figures are too numerous and too consistent to completely dismiss. If multiple people independently reported seeing the girls with someone who appeared to be in a position of authority, there's likely truth somewhere in those accounts. The problem is that without that security guard coming forward, without identifying the specific individual involved, those accounts remain frustratingly inconclusive. The timing troubles me. Late December, 2 days before Christmas, at one of the busiest shopping periods of the year. The mall would have been crowded with witnesses. Security would have been more present than usual. And yet 3 girls vanished without anyone reporting a struggle, screams, or obvious distress. This suggests either that they left willingly with someone they trusted, or that they were removed under circumstances that appeared legitimate to casual observers. A security guard saying, "Come with me," wouldn't cause alarm in a crowded mall. It would look routine, normal. I believe the girls encountered someone at that mall who presented themselves as trustworthy, who had the appearance or authority of legitimacy, and who successfully lured or coerced them away from public view. Whether this person was an actual security guard, someone posing as security, or someone with a different kind of authority, I can't say with certainty. But the pattern fits too well: the witness accounts, the letters, timing, the complete disappearance of 3 girls in broad daylight from a crowded public space. What happened after they left the mall? That's where the case becomes darkest, and where I hesitate to speculate without evidence. The most likely scenario, given that they've never been found alive, is that they encountered violence at the hands of whoever took them. Whether this was someone like de Badeleben, a serial predator operating in the area, or someone more local who successfully evaded investigation, we may never know with certainty. But here's what haunts me most about this case. Someone knows. Either the person responsible is still alive, carrying this secret, or they told someone before they passed away. Someone knows where Rachel, Lisa, and Julie ended up. Someone knows what happened in those missing hours between the mall and eternity, and that person has kept that secret for 50 years, through decades of investigation, through the passing of the girls' parents, through the transformation of Fort Worth from the city it was in 1974 to what it is today. That kind of silence requires either tremendous willpower or a complete absence of conscience. If you've made it this far through this story, if you've invested an hour of your life in understanding what happened to 3 girls who vanished on a December afternoon, I want to ask you something. Don't let this be just another true crime story you consume and forget. These were real people. They had families who loved them. They had futures that were stolen. And somewhere out there might still be someone who knows something. Maybe they don't even realize the significance of what they know. Share this story. Talk about this case. Keep Rachel, Lisa, and Julie's names alive, because the only way cold cases get solved after 50 years is if they remain in public consciousness. If new generations hear about them, if someone finally makes a connection they hadn't made before. The Seminary South Shopping Center where this happened no longer exists. It was demolished years ago, replaced by other developments, transformed into something unrecognizable. The Fort Worth of 1974 is gone, buried under decades of growth and change. The physical location where 3 girls walked through doors and never came out has been erased from the landscape. But the mystery remains. The unanswered questions remain. and 3 families still wait for closure that may never come. Every Christmas season, as shoppers fill malls and people make last-minute trips for forgotten gifts, as children beg to tag along on errands, and parents debate whether to let them go, somewhere in Fort Worth, the families of the missing trio face another anniversary. Another December 23rd. Another year without answers. Another reminder that ordinary moments can transform into lifelong mysteries in the span of an afternoon. I opened this file tonight because I believe every unsolved case deserves to be remembered, every victim deserves to have their story told, and every mystery deserves our attention until it's finally solved. The Fort Worth missing trio, Rachel Trlica, Lisa Wilson and Julie Moseley, walked into a shopping mall on December 23, 1974. They browsed stores, they laughed together, they carried Christmas gifts, and then they vanished so completely that 50 years of investigation, hundreds of tips, countless hours of police work, and the unwavering dedication of their families have failed to answer the single most important question: what happened to them? Somewhere in the forgotten corners of someone's memory, or the guarded secrets of a conscience that can't speak, that answer still exists, waiting. Like 3 girls who walked through mall doors in 1974 and never came out, waiting to be found. This is Julian Cross, closing another file that refuses to stay closed. If this story affected you, if you found yourself imagining those final, ordinary moments, if you felt the weight of 50 years of unanswered questions, then you understand why the Midnight File exists. Subscribe and join me next week when we open another case that the world tried to forget. Because some stories don't let you go until you've heard them all the way through. Until then, remember, every mystery was once someone's reality. Every cold case is a life interrupted, a family shattered, a truth buried but not gone. The Fort Worth missing trio are still missing, the case is still open, and somewhere, somehow, there are still answers waiting to be found. Good night, and if you're ever at a mall this December, spare a thought for 3 girls who should have made it home for Christmas 50 years ago, but never did.